As you may already know, I'm one of many that vastly enjoys the first 3 Paper Mario games and doesn't really care for Sticker Star. 2 months ago, I reluctantly purchased Color Splash and livestreamed my playthrough. Having experienced the game, allow me to tell you how I feel about it, while addressing as many aspects of the game as possible. I will keep this review as spoiler free as possible, so if you want to see spoilers I refer to, be sure to check the description. Additionally, as a disclaimer, this is my first actual video review I've done for a video game. Okay, let's get started. With the first Paper Mario on basic levels, Bowser kidnaps Peach and you have to save her. Going beyond that, Bowser steals the Star Rod and grants his own wish to be strong enough to defeat Mario. He then captures and scatters the Star Spirits and kidnaps Peach by lifting her castle into space. Now Star Kids can't grant the wishes of others on the surface. You have to defeat Bowser and rescue the Star Spirits who are being held captive in different areas that were affected by Bowser's new power. Individual chapters had their own unique stories too. Sticker Star did not have much to offer in regards to story. Fortunately, Color Splash does better, mostly. Bowser's minions are draining paint from Prism Island and its inhabitants, and Koopalings are holding big paint stars hostage, which are sources of Prisma Fountain's paint. He is also harnessing the power of black paint. Together with Huey, the island's emergency recovery unit, he must recolor the island and its inhabitants while stopping Bowser from going forward with his evil scheme. Beyond that, there is a mystery of how Bowser got his new look, but that is told through flashbacks, and most of them don't really add anything important. Even so, when it comes to stories, it's what lies in between that fulfills them. The chapters in Paper Mario games are typically very unique in both conflicts and what they add to the main story. In Color Splash, since it's level-based, the stories are more scattered and small scale, from finding a Toad's clothing to playing hide and seek with Toads, or purifying a park's poisoned waters. They rarely add anything to the overall plot, but provide their own ones here and there, but sometimes none at all. They're small indeed. The secondary color chapters, however, which are orange, purple, and green, happen to have more interesting things occurring, but they're later in the game. Aside from a select few levels, I didn't really find the primary color chapters to be very interesting. The secondary color chapters are the best. My favorite chapters happen to be orange and purple, although I'd rather not spoil what they involve. That actually leads me to talk about the level variety as well. The chapters in previous Paper Mario games were always very unique. You'd find yourself just about anywhere, from a very strange forest of monochrome creatures to an entire kingdom of competitive and unique warriors. Unlike Sticker Star, there are many unique levels, from one such as a coliseum to a mining site. Unfortunately, as stated before, the stories behind the levels have small scopes or even none at all. That totally fulfills the other half of a great chapter, having something interesting that happens. While I may enjoy the unique qualities of a location, the experience doesn't become as memorable when I was just tasked to do something like search for a rescue Toad, or simply just go through the level. The story in Color Splash has more to it than Sticker Star, but you shouldn't expect something like the previous games. The variety of levels, however, is much greater than Sticker Star, and it's a great plus. A common complaint you'll hear about Sticker Star and Color Splash is that they lack any significant character designs or varieties. For the most part, that is true. Besides characters like Kirsty and Huey, all you really have are Toads. Some of them do have unique designs, and that's great. Unfortunately, however, the whole recognize Toads by their personality direction the game went for didn't really cut it well for me. It's hard to forget Toads like the Traveling Sisters 3, Jolene, Zest T, and even the kid Toad that plays Nintendo games. Only one of them is really important to a part of the story. Here, it's hard to remember most of the characters. Without spoiling anything, I specifically remember a very sizable rescue Toad, a working Shy Guy, and a freaky Shy Guy. Huey is pretty enjoyable, too. I know fans dislike Kirsty from Sticker Star, so I'm sure people will be pleased to know that Huey has more of a personality. He's okay. As for the enemies, they don't vary much as well. There are basic Koopas, Boos, Shy Guys, and Bloopers. They are only ones used in typical Mario games. Altogether, there is little character variety within Color Splash, even with its enemies. However, Huey happens to be likable. Now, allow me to briefly touch upon the writing and the humor. Generally, the dialogue and writing maintains the charm that the Paper Mario series is known for, and the humor adds to that bit as well. The humor was generally not too much for me to laugh at, however. There are some jokes in there that I liked, and they were typically pretty hilarious for the time. Overall, the writing and humor aren't bad, they're good. It's just that not most of the humor appeals to me too much, but I see and actually appreciate the direction that they were going for. A major issue of mine with this game is the battle system itself. Oftentimes, I felt that battles lasted much too longer than they should have. It's an overall tedious process. In previous games, making an action was short and simple. You selected an attack, selected an enemy, then executed it. The first and second game required about 3 A presses to do that. Super Paper Mario required 1, or about 3 if you count selecting a pixel. Color Splash has you swiping a couple of times to find a card you want, putting the card in slots, pressing cards ready, tapping and holding to paint the card, pressing ready, swiping upwards, and then waiting a short while to execute the action. It's very slow paced even when you use different options, although the advanced touch controls option eliminates an additional button tap, which is great. Granted, Sticker Star and Color Splash's battle systems function differently, so the layouts are definitely different, but even with Sticker Star's abundance of stickers were battles able to function quickly and smoothly. At the very least, I wish they would have done something like stack cards that are the same. Do you have a bunch of uncolored jump cards? Stack them and put a number at the bottom right of them to tell us how much there are. I'm actually surprised there isn't anything like that. If we go even further, maybe it'd be better if they put the cards into separate categories. You start a battle and then you have a menu with 5 selections: jump, hammer, enemy, things, and miscellaneous for stuff like mushrooms and fire flowers. If there aren't any cards for a certain category, then the respective button will be uncolored, just like a card. Having uncolored versions of cards super close to colored versions also sounds like a good idea. Having colored cards all the way to the right also added to the tedious swiping issue. You know what would have also been a good idea? A paint all cards button that functions just like painting a card normally. Touch the button to paint them all and let go when you feel like you've painted enough. I would have also liked the option to paint cards before battle, but that may miss with what they intended for the battle system. With the way it's set up, you can only tinker with it so much for the sake of speeding things up. They could have definitely done something more to make it less tedious at least. Speaking of tedious, I absolutely hated the random comic appearances in battles. Having my cards limited or covered while disabling my option to flee just made that one battle so much more frustrating than it needed to be. Now, besides the battle system itself, another thing that bothered me about battling was the overworld enemies. Allow me to explain. Color Splash has a leveling system that allows you to increase the paint that you can hold, which allows you to paint cards in the environment more without worries of running out. This is a step up from Sticker Star, where there wasn't much of a point to battling overworld enemies since you got all of the stickers you needed within the environment, as well as coins even. Unfortunately, there is an issue with Color Splash's solution. There are a lot of mandatory enemy battles. Seriously. You even get your rewards after battling, so it's like fighting overworld enemies. There are plenty of times where you just progress through a level, and all of a sudden, Shy Guys notice you. Hey, it's Mario, get him! Since there were so many, I didn't feel like the need to go out and battle overworld enemies so often. That strategy worked fine for the most part, except that enemies practically existed just to be a nuisance. Need to make a jump? There's an enemy there that's making it pretty tough to dodge. Need to do something? Enemies are constantly chasing you. I often ended up battling overworld enemies as a result of trying to move on because they wouldn't leave me alone. As for the balance of paint capacities, I also found enough paint from environmental objects in battles I stumbled into, and battles aren't very drawn out during the beginning parts of the game, so running out of paint actually isn't a big deal, nor an often occurrence, with how much they balanced it. With my manner of playing, the amount of paint I could hold was just fine. It almost felt like more than enough, but it was totally sufficient. The great thing about RPGs is that you have an incentive to battle. If you don't get stronger, and your lack of abilities and strengths brings you at a significant disadvantage against important enemies when it comes to progressing through the main storyline. There will be enough enemies that the game tosses at me to level up my paint meter from, so why should I go out and do it myself? With that question in mind, the last thing I want is to be constantly slowed down. I just want to progress, whether that means solving a puzzle, getting through an area, or simply getting to a puzzle. One thing I must mention, however, is an ability that allows you to defeat enemies quickly. As you progress through the game and collect more paint stars, you'll extend your ability to defeat overworld enemies by attacking them. That's a great decision on the development team's part. However, my criticism of this is that they should have made it more obvious which enemies are weak enough to defeat without battle. You will have to go through trial and error with which ones you can defeat, and that'll simply waste more of your time if you're unlucky. From what it seems, only the hammer will be able to do that and not your jump at the same time. I guess I gained that strength separately for some reason. Overall, there truly needs to be a decision between the two. Have a lot of mandatory battles and few overworld enemies, or an average amount of enemies in the overworld and little to no event battles. At the end of it all, I don't mind the concept of using disposable cards to battle that much, and it's still bearable as it is, but I wish they would have implemented ways that makes battles much more smoother and faster. I found all of the overworld enemies to get quite annoying during my playthrough. Since there are quite a number of event battles, I wish we would have just had less overworld enemies. Let's briefly talk about the puzzles in this game. The puzzles are relatively simple and come in short bursts. The punishing trial and error ones don't sit well with me, as well as the ones that require you to stop your tracks in search of something somewhere you've been before. Finding things for the most part has been easier with more hints that are provided. There's also a trash can toad that tells you exactly what thing you need next, and pretty much seems like a Merlin for this game. However, if you decide to try and figure out most of their locations or things you need yourself, you may have a hard time. There are points in the game that I genuinely wouldn't have even guessed I needed a certain thing or where to get it. What I would have preferred is that the specific thing you needed had a consistent hint to it before your last resort was trash toad, especially for boss battles. For some battles, you seriously will not know that you needed a certain thing until you've gone through it and lost to it once. If it wasn't for my live stream commenters, I would have had an even more tedious playthrough. On the other hand, cutouts are also like stickerizing in Sticker Star, but you're basically either trying to cut out an area to replace a card with, or you're aligning the game's camera correctly to cut out a section to progress. They're typically not very difficult and I don't mind them. Concerning the role of the rescue toads, I honestly didn't enjoy the fetch quest. It was always so frustrating to stop my progress from time to time because I missed a few of them. It felt like extra busy work I needed to do before I had to move on, and unfortunately there are quite a few of these quests that aren't limited to rescue toads, but things and other miscellaneous items as well, as I mentioned before. Some items are just randomly hidden in a previously visited place and have no significance until the game says so, which prompts you to backtrack to get it. It's a very tedious aspect of the game that I dislike. I'm generally not a fan of the game's puzzles that consist of having the right things at the right time, or stopping your tracks to look for items. Having the trash can toad is great, although I prefer that the significance of key items was more naturally implemented. Initially, I was going to say that the soundtrack wasn't generally catchy, but in the end, that would have been totally unfair for me to say. My first playthrough of the game was by live streaming, and I was essentially commentating all day. It was only with my second playthrough that I could actually sit down and appreciate the music much more. Most of the pieces were so much catchier than I remember them being. I've listed some favorites in the description if you don't mind spoilers. When it comes to games like The Thousand Year Door and Super Paper Mario, they were pretty much my childhood games. I replayed them tons of times, so most of their soundtracks are naturally engraved in my head. Looking back at them objectively, they genuinely have a ton of catchy themes, but in the end, it will come down to your preference. I will just leave it at that and say that the soundtrack for the most part is actually really great. I just dislike pieces that were more, how should I say, atmospheric. Counter Splash's music is great at the end of it all. This game has a hefty amount of things to unlock for your enjoyment. For one, you can listen to the music of an area if you've painted in every single spot. I seriously appreciate options like this in video games. Sound tests were the only way I could actually listen to video game music without interruptions as a child, that is, until I got my own computer, so this is pretty cool. However, people frequently use the internet nowadays, so if that's really not worth all the effort for you, then just listen to the soundtrack online. Port Prisma has flags that list your achievements. If you happen to get all 6 achievements, you'll get a secret ending after defeating the final boss. It doesn't feel worth it for me, especially since I'm not someone who really cares about in-game achievements like those, but you might want to try that out. Maybe you would rather look up the secret ending online, whatever floats your boat. You can also unlock a bunch of concept art by donating cards to be displayed in a museum, which is also pretty cool. Once again, you could just use the internet to view them, but stuff like this is a great incentive to keep you playing the game. Oh, and Rochambeau temples are still there, indicates that you want to try to beat all of the masters. Overall, the extra activities this game offers aren't asking too much of you. There's still a decent deal of rewards to be reaped from playing after beating the main story. Overall, Paper Mario Color Splash is not the entry in the series I had hoped for. It heavily resembled a previous game I did not enjoy, and that sadly did not make me very enthusiastic about this and made me long for an entry like any of the previous ones. However, even when they decide to go with a different direction for Paper Mario, they still have something manageable that people like. The battle system as a whole is a major downside to the game for me, and the puzzles, characters, and story doesn't really cut it out well for me either. However, the battle system is still manageable, and the game's music, visuals, and writing are all pretty great too. If any part of you didn't really mind Sticker Star as a whole, there's a good chance that you'll warm up to this game. If you loved the first 3 games and couldn't stand Sticker Star at its core, it's still possible that you'll like this one, but I highly recommend that you wait for a price drop if you're willing to give it a chance. It's definitely not a bad game, but for my preference of games and standards, I wouldn't exactly call it amazing either. The game is simply good. I'm giving this a 6 out of 10.